Fahrenheit and feeling very warm. 7 o'clock.
Morning from Jenny and me. It's 7 o'clock on Thursday, the 1st of May. The headlines: the talking's over, the voting begins. After one of the longest election campaigns in recent years, polling stations across the country are now open. Talks will resume this morning in an attempt to end the protest by loyalist inmates at the Maze prison. Now, the Foreign Office has told British citizens still in the Zairian capital Kinshasa to leave as rebel forces advance towards the city.
Also in BBC Breakfast News, the threat to one of polling day's great institutions, the plastic rival that might yet replace the traditional ballot box.
And we look back on a crucial night of World Cup football. England enjoyed a win over Georgia, but there was disappointment for Scotland and Northern Ireland.
General election finally got underway a few moments ago when polling stations up and down the country opened their doors to voters. It follows an election campaign lasting 6 weeks, one of the longest ever. Polling stations will stay open until 10 o'clock tonight. Now, correspondent Maxine Mawhinney is at Twickenham in South London. Maxine, a little early. Is there much activity?
There's a lot of activity. The doors opened literally a moment ago. We've had 20, 40 people already rushing in. In fact, they were queued up to get in as soon as the doors opened. It's a good time for people to vote. They like to do it on their way to work, get it out of the way early. And actually, Andrew, there's a lot of them for them to think about when they come to vote. This is really a record-breaking year in British politics. There are 3,717 candidates. That's more than ever before. And of those, a record-breaking 685 are women. And it's not just candidates people have the choice of. There are also more political parties than ever before. 13 of them this year. That's twice as many as in 1992. And each of them have fielded more than 50 candidates. So a lot of choice going on here around the country. What it all means is that this year there will be 659 MPs returned to Westminster. And that's 8 more than in the last election, mainly due to boundary changes. That means that the newly elected House of Commons will be the biggest since the 1920s.
And of course, it's not just parliamentary elections, is it?
No, there are half of the electorate in England can vote also in local council elections. There are 34 of those taking place throughout the country today.
Maxine, much sign of security there?
There's always security every year at an election, Andrew, but I spoke to the presiding officer here in Twickenham just before the polls open, and he said there is heightened security at polling stations throughout the country. They were all under instructions to search the buildings before anyone was allowed in, and voters, when they come to stations, may be asked to have their bags searched when they come through the door. Now, you can see that, as usual, we have the British Bobby here at the door, which we see every year, but there is an increased security presence. It may not be visible, and it certainly will not interfere with the electoral process, but it is in place.
Maxine, thanks very much.
Talks aimed at ending the protest by loyalist inmates at the Maze jail near Belfast will continue this morning. The prisoners, who've taken control of 2 H blocks, are demonstrating against new security measures. I'm joined now from Belfast by our Ireland correspondent, Mark Devonport. Mark, what have things been like overnight at the Maze?
Well, so far as I can gather, things have been fairly calm during the course of the night. Certainly there have been no reports from inside the prison going out to the government press office here of any kind of major incidents, although they'll get a fuller assessment later on this morning. There was smoke rising from within the prison during the course of yesterday evening, so there were obviously some more fires being lit, but nothing too dramatic.
Can you remind us why the talks broke down yesterday?
Well, these were the first talks, and both sides set out starkly contrasting positions. The political representatives of the prisoners, those are the loyalist politicians from 2 small fringe parties, as they're called here, set out a position that really loyalists should be treated differently from the IRA prisoners who'd been involved in an escape attempt last month, and that they shouldn't be punished as they saw it for what the IRA prisoners had done. The government stuck to its view that it's simply implementing new restrictions, having reviewed the situation, and that there has to be one rule for all prisoners in the jail. So they're going to have to work on the detail to see if there's any compromise.
What hope do you think there is that there can be some kind of progress today?
Well, I think there's potential for compromise. For instance, the prisoners are saying that they're not necessarily against extra cell checks and head counts, but they don't want to be locked up whilst that occurs. So maybe they'll be able to work on areas like that. But at the moment, certainly emotions are very high on the loyalist side. The prisoners' relatives who I talked to outside the jail yesterday were very angry, and there was talk of this spreading beyond the jail if there's not a solution pretty quickly.
Well, is there any indication of how long the authorities are prepared to let it go on unchecked? Any indication they might move in?
I don't think that they'll move in at all rapidly. I think they'll be very wary of moving in. There's been this specific threat from the Ulster Freedom Fighters that they will pay a price if they use riot squads to break this up. I think they will want to allow this protest to run its course for some kind of solution to be found during talks, and for the prisoners perhaps just to get a little bit bored with what they're doing at the moment. I imagine that's their preferred option.
Mark, thank you.
The British ambassador in the Zairian capital Kinshasa has written to Britons living there, urging them to leave as soon as possible and warning them that if conditions deteriorate, it might become difficult to leave. The move comes despite news that President Mobutu and the rebel leader Laurent Kabila have finally agreed to meet tomorrow for peace talks.
Mr. President.
If it took a great deal of arm twisting by US envoy Bill Richardson to persuade Mr. Mobutu to the negotiating table, it'll be even harder to get the two sides to agree on what the talk should be about. Mr. Richardson's terms of reference are so wide they could mean anything and everything.
We move ahead with a peaceful, inclusive transition, elections, reconciliation.
His credibility severely dented by the refugee crisis, Mr. Kabila will want to show some statesmanship, but his goal is unchanged: to get rid of President Mobutu, to which end his troops are advancing on Kinshasa.
He has now some, he kept some advantage, and he will still try to move ahead his troop, and maybe try to control Kinshasa by pushing.
Already the rebel march on Kinshasa has cut it off from the food-producing area to the east. Market prices are going up, and food distribution is becoming common as increasing numbers find they can't afford to feed their families. There's still no guarantee that the talks will lift the threat of violence. People here talk about a nightmare scenario in which Mr. Mobutu's troops, facing final and humiliating defeat, indulge in one last bout of looting before the curtain is drawn on Africa's longest and most corrupt dictatorship. George Alagaya, BBC News, Kinshasa.
Here to discuss the situation in Zaire is David Shearer of the Institute of International Strategic Studies. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
We've got this face-to-face meeting agreed. Does that ensure or suggest that there may be some kind of peaceful settlement?
I don't think Kabila is going to really accept any sort of transition where Mobutu stays in power. So very much he's been saying, we're going to push ahead, I'm going to be in charge, and essentially he's looking at this as Mobutu saying, I will step aside and allow this to happen.
Because Reuters are just reporting that they're going to discuss a peaceful and negotiated settlement. Hardly looks like that.
I think that what they're trying to do, and certainly what the Americans are pushing very hard for, is a transition which prevents any fighting within Kinshasa, a peaceful transition that will enable a change of power, if you like, and allow Mobutu to exit gracefully and Kabila to be able to start taking over, but also moving towards elections and democracy.
So how easy will it be to engineer a graceful exit for Mobutu?
I think it'll be very difficult, because you've got a man here who's been there for 32 years. He's been continually told that he's the chief, the overall supreme ruler. He believes it himself. I'm sure he believes his own propaganda to some degree. And for him to go is an absolute defeat, of course. And I think it's probably a little unrealistic that he's just going to bow out and say, my time is over. I think he will try and hang on for whatever he can.
Well, apart from anything else, he's got a lot of money tied up in the country.
Well, exactly, and I don't think we're going to see very much of that money coming back either. I mean, there was some suggestions that the amount of money he's got could even repay the sort of the national debt, and he's going to hang on to that.
David, what does all this mean for the refugees?
I think what's happened is, to a degree is, and what is very interesting is that one is the power of the Americans to be able to bring these two to the negotiating table, but also to put pressure on Kabila to free up the refugees. But secondly, Kabila has sort of stepped out of the shadows. He really was an unknown figure before this happened, and Western, particularly US foreign policy was very much, what do we do about Zaire? There was some bewilderment about what in fact could happen. Kabila has provided very conveniently a focus for American foreign policy, and all of a sudden, with the plight of these refugees, people are saying, hang on, who is this guy Kabila? What do we know about him? Is he really the kind of the good guy he seems to be over the last few months?
So all sides are interested, I suppose, in a way, in keeping down any problems that have arisen with the refugees.
Oh, well, particularly Kabila. I'm sure Mobutu will try and play this to his own advantage, and so you've got a despot here who's trying to take over Zaire, and I'm sure Mobutu is trying to hang on to try and engineer some sort of cracks in the alliance that Kabila is leading. And in fact, there are some suggestions that there are cracks starting to open up now as the objectives are coming into sight. So yes, I mean, Kabila's credibility and his reputation has been badly damaged by what's happened in the eastern part of Zaire.
A final thought. President Mobutu goes, but where?
It's a good question. Nobody really wants him. Of course, he's been receiving treatment for his prostate cancer in France. I'm not sure that France would necessarily want to have him hanging around on the doorstep for the next few years. I don't think he's very likely he'll stay around in Zaire. So that's a question that maybe we talked about tomorrow.
David Shearer, thanks very much. Thanks.
British Airways has called on the government to intervene in a dispute with the French authorities over airport safety. The company is worried about security at Charles de Gaulle Airport after Air Algérie, seen as a terrorist target, was allowed to open a check-in desk next to its own. BA has been refused permission to transfer its services to Orly Airport in Paris.
The Snowdrop campaign, which called for an end to the private ownership of handguns after the Dunblane killings, is being officially wound up today. The group, started by local parents, collected more than 700,000 names on a petition against handguns. They'll now give their support to a national pressure group.
Millions of customers of building societies which are converting into banks could be worse off, despite receiving large windfalls. A report by the Consumers Association says any payments are likely to be eroded over time by lower interest rates and more expensive mortgages. But the converted societies describe the findings as misleading.
Janet Maidment is among the millions of people to benefit from the wave of change engulfing building societies. As a former saver with the Abbey National and the Halifax, Janet and her husband Eric received payments worth several £1000s as the societies have abandoned the constraints of mutual status to become banks.
Well, that's on the other account.
Unlike many, the Maidments opposed the conversions, and despite the society's largesse, they've now moved their savings to one of the few remaining mutuals.
Maybe there are short-term benefits with banks, but I think in the long term, mutuals are far better because they are in a position to take care only of their customers.
Janet and Eric Maidment have helped the Nationwide Building Society pick up 3 times more business in the past 2 months than they did a year ago. Other mutuals are telling a similar story. While some of this can be explained by the prospect of further windfalls, the Consumers Association believes it's also because customers are recognising that mutuals can offer a better deal. The Consumers Association compared building society savings rates over the last 3 years. Converting societies such as the Halifax, Alliance and Leicester and Abbey National, as expected, paid fluctuating rates of interest. But the mutual societies such as the Nationwide and the Bradford and Bingley consistently paid customers more for their savings, with the gap widening as the number of conversions increased. It's a similar pattern for mortgage rates.
The banks and the wannabe banks are caught between a rock and a hard place. If they follow us with their rates, their margins have to come down. That means their share price will come down and their city masters will not be pleased.
Rubbish, say banks like the newly converted Alliance and Leicester. It intends to use its conversion to improve and expand its services. And it says the comparisons used by the Consumers Association are misleading.
We have to remain competitive. We have to look at our cost structures. We have to look at the range of products. We don't just compete on price, we compete on service and convenience and lots of other things that are important to the consumer.
As long as the mutuals remain, consumers have a choice. Our fear is that if these large mutuals are subject to a hostile takeover bid and they disappear, that's when consumers could really lose out.
Converted societies already dominate the high street. By the end of the year, only 2 of the top 10 mortgage lenders will be mutual. So far, the tug-of-war for customers has led to better services and more choice for people like the Maidments. The fear is that that will change for the worse if the mutuals find they can no longer afford their current level of generosity. Russell Hayes, BBC News.
Hospitals are under threat of destruction, according to a report by the pressure group Save Britain's Heritage. The problem of what to do with redundant hospitals, many of them listed as being of architectural or historic importance, is a growing one.
St George's Hospital in Stafford. Dignified, imposing, and for more than a century, a home to thousands of mentally ill people. Today, the slates have gone from the roofs and the security fences can't keep out the scavengers. Inside, it's rotting and derelict, the wards trashed by dossers, many of whom were former patients, dispersed into the community when the hospital closed. 3 years ago, it was sold for redevelopment. A scheme to turn it into student flats fell through. Now, a fine public building is in danger of crumbling away. St George's, with its ravaged chapel, is one of the worst examples among around 200 historic hospitals now in danger of destruction. St George's sale raised £3 million. The money went towards new buildings at the modern mental hospital next door. Campaigners say greater care is needed to ensure more hospitals don't go the same way as St George's.
Often the answer with these sites is not to sell them to the highest bidder, but to sell them to the developer who will be able to treat them sensitively and create a community for them. And this is actually very important for the localities where they're being built, because they're places that are very important for the local towns. They're places that in the 19th century there was a lot of pride associated with them. They're built incredibly well.
In Stockport, one firm of developers is showing what can be done. Stockport Infirmary was designed in 1832 by Manchester's first professional architect.
It was designed to impress. I think that the Greek Revival style was in its late flowering in the 1830s. One of the interesting things is that this building was put up at the time that the British Museum was being erected. And so Stockport was going, in the leading edge of architectural style at that time.
The developers here first wanted to knock down all but the front wall. Preservationists objected. Now more of the original building will be kept and become a hotel. This is the 10th old hospital these developers have bought. They say planners and conservationists need to understand developers' problems better.
We found with our schemes, in our experience, that it actually cost as much as twice as much to preserve some of the listed elements than it would be to actually rebuild them and replace them. Although our prerogative and our ideas normally find a marriage between the two.
The government has made things easier by changing the rules. Departments selling historic buildings like this no longer have to get the best possible price, and they must try to find appropriate owners and uses.
It is possible to find new uses for old hospitals, but with so many on the market, inevitably not all will survive. Nick Hyam, BBC News, Stockport.
18 minutes past 7. Let's have the latest market news now from Adam.
Thanks very much. Well, the chug of the steamroller heard clearly on the New York stock market. The Dow Jones broke through the 7,000 level for the first time in about 7 weeks. That came despite a very substantial rise in the rate of growth of the economy there. And it came amid hopes that Congress and President Clinton will come to some deal on a new budget package. The Dow, anyway, closing at 7,009, up just over 46 points. Over in Japan, the Nikkei is now closed up 124 points, off its highs at 19,275. On the foreign exchanges, the dollar hit its highest level against the yen for almost 5 years. It's now trading against the yen at 127.39, moving up almost half a yen there. Against the mark, it's 173.30, moving up, well, near enough a fifth of a pfennig stronger. The pound, that's now trading against the market 281.40, and that's just up over a third of a pfennig. Can't see it there, but the Irish pund fell sharply as the Irish Central Bank said it would stop propping up the currency. Markets are also betting on the currency entering EMU and weakening its links with the UK. The FTSE, that closed yesterday up 2 points at 4,436. GKN moved higher on news that it will buy Sinter Metals of Ohio. They closed up 40 at 951. That's it from me. More business in half an hour. Now back to Andrew.
Adam, thanks very much. And back to you-know-what. Throughout the campaign, Breakfast News has been talking to some of the people who work behind the scenes during a general election to ensure the voting and the counting is part of a seamless operation. And this morning, we look finally at an unsung hero of the electoral process, the traditional metal ballot box. It's an essential feature of polling day, but its future is threatened by a rival.
the local school, voting in a local election, and having sort of stood there for a few seconds looking at the rather antiquated ballot box that was on the table, I thought, well, surely there's a better way of doing this. The Home Office have a specification on the ballot box, which covers just about everything from its volume to its security, through to its security aspects, and also its obviously its fire retardancy. It became a challenge in that it took almost 3 years.
It's a very secure container. The lid fixes on very simply. It's a lot lighter than the existing metal ballot box. Closes simply. Insert the tag here, this end, open the slot. The slot's been designed to be exactly the same size as the existing ballot box slot, and at the end of the day the slot is closed and the security tag is inserted like that.
We are the largest local authority in the country, and we have 661 polling stations, and in Birmingham we had this problem about storing the old tin boxes, which used to take up a lot of space and consequently cost a lot of money, awkward to carry, sharp corners and whatever, and it also, in order to comply with the regulations, it has to be sealed in a number of places, and these were seen to be a very viable alternative. Because of their shape, they are tapered and they stack one inside of another. There isn't all the paraphernalia required with the sealing wax to seal them up.
In Leeds, for example, as you can see from around here, we haven't a storage space problem, and in my opinion anyway, the tin boxes, as we call them, are much more a part of the election, more traditional than the plastic ones. To me, it's as much a part of the scene as the politicians is the old tin ballot box.
And you can hear all about it in a special edition of Breakfast News tomorrow morning. We'll be on the air at 6 a.m. Justin will be in the Election 97 studio to bring you the latest results and analysis.
Now, we probably don't realise it, but all of us in Britain live within 10 miles of a sacred site. Now, a body called the Sacred Land Project is setting out to restore and publicise the sites, ranging from well-known ones like Stonehenge and the great cathedrals to sacred wells and the pilgrimage routes that crisscross the country.
Secluded in the Shropshire Hills, the Hermitage of Saints Anthony and Cuthbert is one of the sites being highlighted by the Sacred Lands Project. It's home to Brother Aidan, the only Greek Orthodox hermit in Britain, an artist who earns his living by painting and selling icons. In the Orthodox tradition, an icon is far more than a simple painting. It's a doorway between earth and heaven. Aidan regards the entire hermitage as an icon, an opening to God, and much of his time is spent in solitary prayer in the tiny chapel. For Aidan, prayer and work are the two halves of a life lived free of human relationships so that it can concentrate on reaching out to God.
Above all, I want to repent of my own sins, to learn a bit of humility so that I can regain paradise within, and then express that outwardly in the hermitage, so the hermitage is an icon of a living relationship with God.
The Hermitage is the holiest shrine in the country for Britain's Orthodox Christians. But 3 years ago, when Aidan moved in, it was a semi-derelict farm with nothing remotely sacred about it. The pigsties are still waiting to be turned into rooms for visitors. For some people, this is Christianity for today.
When I was a child, you could walk into any church, countryside or town. They were open. Now, through fear of theft, more than theft, I think, they're shut. And I think that says a great deal. It's saying, we don't actually want you in here. And that's what we're doing here. We're trying to provide spaces where people can come towards the church or towards God, but do so at their own pace, And this place is welcoming in a way that so many churches are no longer.
Brother Aidan's solitary life is something not many of us would wish to contemplate. For him, though, the life of worship is not the meaningless ritual we might find it. It is liberation, freedom to live in the light of God. Alex Kirby, BBC News, Shropshire.
And outside, things are hotting up, purely in weather terms, of course. Here's John Ketley.
Yes, indeed, Andrew, a glorious day today. Very gentle winds across most of the country. Like yesterday, though, quite stiff at times, quite stiff southwesterlies running across those far northwestern parts of Scotland. And maybe the wind strengthening further during the day across in Shetland, coming up to 25 or 30 miles an hour there. Now, at the moment, it's quite misty across central and southern parts of England. Some thicker patches of fog too, but burning off very rapidly with glorious sunshine across much of the country. In fact, we've got a camera shot here from North Yorkshire, I think. And you can see here no more than some cirrus cloud. Very wispy cloud way up in the sky there, 25, 30,000 feet, something like that. Quite innocuous, and that's the way it's going to stay all day. So a glorious scene there, and indeed a glorious scene for many of us. Although in the far north of Scotland, just the odd patch of rain coming through during the day may become more persistent towards the end of the afternoon. Always a chance of some fog patches lapping onto these western coasts, though. Maybe the odd fog patch too down in the Channel, but otherwise it's sunshine virtually all the way, and a very warm day coming up too. Refreshing sea breezes setting in during the afternoon, so temperatures pegged back to about 16 on the coast at times. But I think we're looking at 23, 24 degrees inland. And that's into the mid-70s Fahrenheit. It really is going to be a much warmer day than yesterday even. And then tonight, under fairly clear skies, some mist and fog patches developing later on. Temperatures down to 7 or 8. But again, and way up in the far north of Scotland, there will be some more persistent rain coming along later on. And it's much the same story for Friday as well. Some rain up in the far north of Scotland. And then elsewhere, sunshine all the way, temperatures 21 to 23 degrees typically, but there will be some mist and fog to clear away first thing. That's what we've got now, mist and fog clearing away, but lingering perhaps around these western coasts. A little bit of rain way up in the far north. That's it from me.
John, thank you very much indeed. Later in this morning's breakfast news, mixed fortunes on a night of World Cup football. Sheer ecstasy for England, but misery for Scotland and Northern Ireland.
And as Dartmoor recovers after a series of devastating brush fires, how are Britain's other tinder-dry parklands coping with the increased risk of fire? Join us in just a moment on the North Yorkshire Moors. But first, the news, travel and weather wherever you are this morning.
Yes, and here we are in Yorkshire on this Thursday morning. The time is 28 minutes past 7. Thank you for joining us. The main stories from Look North. Extensive changes to Sheffield's accident and emergency services come into effect today. Health unions fear the closure of a department in the city centre could lead to problems in the future.
The Accident and Emergency Department at the Royal Hallamshire Hospital has closed and services have been transferred to the Northern General Hospital across the city. As from today, all accident emergencies in Sheffield will be dealt with at one central unit, which managers say will be more efficient. Non-accident emergencies like heart attacks, however, will be dealt with at the Royal Hallamshire. But some people fear leaving the city centre with just one A&E department could store up problems for the future.
Ways of stopping pregnant women from smoking will be discussed at a conference in North Lincolnshire today. Figures show that 1 in 3 pregnant women still smoke despite the risks. Today's event, organised by HALT, the Humberside Alliance on Tobacco, will bring national and local experts together to look at the latest research on smoking and pregnancy. Birdwatchers in East Yorkshire say they're concerned about the future of the observatory on Spurn Point. The building's one of the best bird-watching sites in Britain, but is threatened with being washed away by the sea. The Spurn Peninsula and its surroundings are home to populations of birds which attract watchers from across the country. The observatory is also a centre for scientific study, but experts believe a new site must be found because of erosion. Hundreds of people are expected to line the quayside in Boston today as the replica of Captain Cook's ship, the HMS Endeavour, arrives later today. Next week she sails to Whitby, nearly 250 years after she first left. Sophie Rayworth reports.
Yorkshire's most famous explorer, Captain Cook, set sail on HMS Endeavour in August 1768. The ship was built in Whitby and used in the coal trade until the Admiralty bought her for Captain Cook's expedition.
He was going to totally unknown places. He was sailing to places where the map said, here be dragons and here be sea serpents. And he took those sayings off the map.
This replica of the Endeavour was built in Australia. She's crossed the world and arrives in Boston at lunchtime before going on to Whitby.
And we can see more on the Endeavour's return tonight, because Look North will be coming live from Boston tonight. Usual time, 6:30, BBC One. Finally, there's been a burst water main at Kirkburton near Huddersfield. There are delays on the A629 at Penistone Road, an area to be avoided over the next couple of hours. And by the way, if you're coming into Leeds today, there's no parking around the Town and Civic Hall in Leeds, and the large Cookridge Street car park will be closed from 6:30 tonight. That's it from us so far this morning. If you can stay with us, our next summary will be at 5 minutes to 8 here on Breakfast News. Well, you don't need me to tell you after John's forecast. Dry, sunny and very warm. Those are the temperatures, getting up to 23 Celsius, and that is 73 Fahrenheit.
It's 7:31. Welcome if you've just joined us. This morning's main stories. Voting in the general election has finally got underway after the polls opened half an hour ago. The United Nations has begun its operation to repatriate Rwandan Hutu refugees from eastern Zaire. Nearly 200 children were flown to the Rwandan capital, Kigali. Talks are to resume today to try to end the protest by loyalist prisoners at the Maze jail near Belfast. Inmates have taken control of 2 H blocks, claiming they're being punished because of an escape attempt by IRA prisoners at the jail. And the Snowdrop campaign, which was set up to end the private ownership of handguns after the Dunblane killings, is being officially wound up today. Those were the main news stories. Now let's have the sport with Eleanor.
Thanks, Jenny. Good morning. There were mixed fortunes for England and Scotland in last night's World Cup matches. Scotland, who could have virtually sealed qualification, lost 2-1 in Sweden. Meanwhile, England hardly set Wembley alight, but a 2-0 win over Georgia keeps alive their chances of finishing ahead of Italy at the top of Group 2.
An expectant, near-capacity crowd at Wembley, but the supporters were to be in for an anxious evening. The home side struggled to create clear-cut chances early on. The few that did arise were wasted. It wasn't until 2 minutes before the interval that England finally made the breakthrough. Shearer and Sheringham, so effective during Euro 96, combining once again. That, though, could so easily have been wiped out after half-time, but David Seaman's legs spared Graham Lasso's blushes. England always looked edgy with such a narrow lead. David Beckham came close to settling the nerves, but an international goal continues to elude him. With the home side unable to settle the match, Georgia continued to threaten. Seyadowsa's shot clipped the bar on its way past Seaman's goal. Only in injury time did England eventually add a second. Shearer's strike was the last kick in the game, better remembered for the result rather than the performance.
We got a decent goal 2 or 3 minutes before the break, and that should have settled us down. I thought in the first half we were well in control, but the second half wasn't so good. And really, I suppose they were the better side in the second half because they passed it extremely well.
In Gothenburg, there was little doubt as to who was the better side. Scotland were outplayed by Sweden, who had the distinction of scoring the first goal against Craig Brown's team during the whole qualifying campaign. Sweden's second came 80 minutes into the second half, just as a first off the boot of Kenneth Anderson. Scotland, knowing that even a draw would have boosted their chances of playing in France next year, did pull one back through Kevin Gallagher. But unfortunately for the group leaders, that's where the comeback ended.
We hate to lose, and it's not in the Scottish make-up to be happy when you lose on a football match, but we lost to a better team tonight, and we've got to put our hands up and say that we weren't good enough on the day.
Scotland's next match is against Belarus on June the 8th, but if they're to win their group, they must now rely on Sweden and Austria slipping up. James Pearce, BBC News.
And Scotland's lead at the top of Group 4 has been cut to 4 points by Austria, who beat Estonia. Austria and Sweden both have 2 games in hand over Scotland. England are 4 points behind Italy, who beat Poland 3-0 in Naples last night. England have 1 game in hand. And joining me now from Edinburgh is the former England international Trevor Steven, now playing in Scotland with Rangers. Trevor, let's talk about England first of all. The verdict seems to be a good win, but not a great performance at Wembley.
I would have to agree with that. I think the win was vital for England, and seeing that Italy beat Poland convincingly as well, it was just a game that England did have to win, and they got the points, and Glenn Hoddle's now got time to assess things for the next game. But 2 good goals, I thought, on the night from Sheringham and Shearer, so that was a pleasing thing.
They do seem to be the ideal strike partnership really for England, don't they, under Glenn Hoddle?
Certainly when they're on that sort of form, you know, I watched them through the game, and Sheringham always impresses me. He's a type of centre forward who will keep a hold of the ball, and he always looks comfortable on it. He's got an intelligent brain there, and Shearer will give everything, and a clinical finish there at the end, you know, which possibly made the final result a bit more pleasing for England than it could have been, say, halfway through the second half.
There seemed to be a problem, particularly in the second half, with lack of creativity and lack of actually managing to keep possession for England. And I noticed in some of the papers this morning there are now calls for the recall of your Rangers teammate Gazza.
Yeah, well, Gazza is an exceptional player, and if he's at full fitness, I think he would really walk into any England side. That was possibly the one thing that England did miss last night, is a bit of creativity. I thought Beckham did well on the right-hand side, but that's not his normal position, and with McManaman not playing, then you do need somebody to create the chances, and Gascoigne's the perfect man for that.
Do you think he can get fit and come back for England?
He's looking tremendously good in training at the moment, and he's wound up for the last 3 games that we have up here in Scotland, and he's looking forward to playing in those and contributing to the England squad.
Now, what about Scotland? What's the mood like in Edinburgh this morning? Are the papers getting a bit depressed about this defeat by Sweden?
I've just had a glance at the newspapers, but I think more or less taking it on the chin. I think they were beaten by the better side on the night, and Sweden scored 2 great goals. Scotland have had a tremendous defensive record, but if you go to Gothenburg, play Sweden on the home territory, it's always going to be difficult. And if they get that first goal, then it really is a mountain to climb to get back into it, which Scotland almost did, actually.
OK, Trevor, thanks for joining us this morning.
Okay.
Trevor Stephen from Edinburgh. The Republic of Ireland have slipped to 4th place in Group 8 after a 1-0 defeat in Romania. Adrian Ilias scored Romania's winner after 32 minutes when Ian Hart's clearance landed at his feet. And here it comes. The Republic missed the chance to earn a draw when Roy Keane's second-half penalty was saved. Northern Ireland's slim hopes of qualification all but evaporated after a goalless draw in Armenia. They now have 7 points from 7 games. Macclesfield came within 5 minutes of reaching the Football League last night, needing a win at Halifax to gain promotion from the GM Vauxhall Conference. They were leading 3-1 with 9 minutes remaining, but 2 late goals for Halifax kept Kidderminster's promotion dreams alive. The semi-finals of the World Snooker Championship begin today in Sheffield. Alain Robidoux will play Ken Doherty, and the defending champion Stephen Hendry faces Thailand's James Watanabe. Watanabe reached the last 4 with a 13-frames-to-10 victory over the former world champion John Parrott. Coverage of the semi-finals begins on BBC One at 2:10. Riddick Bowe, the former undisputed world heavyweight champion, has announced his retirement from boxing. He joined the US Marines earlier this year, but left after just 10 days. Well, there's bound to be a feeling of déjà vu at Wembley on Saturday when the teams emerge for the Challenge Cup final. Last year, St Helens beat the Bradford Bulls in one of the best finals in recent memory. And this weekend, Bradford again formed the opposition for the cup holders.
When I say go, the first man runs out, round the back, and plays the ball. All right?
This is a side of St Helens star player Paul Newlove that the fans rarely see. After a gruelling training session, he and his teammate Chris Morley take time to pass on a few tips to the school children of Merseyside.
You know what happens now to the losers? We go down for 5 press-ups.
But that's a punishment the St Helens team don't have to suffer much. Last year they won the Challenge Cup and the first Super League title. Yet some would consider them the underdogs at Wembley. They'll be playing a team unbeaten this season.
The pressure will be on Bradford, I think, because we won it last year. I mean, we've known to prove we've done it. So, yeah, like I say, I think the pressure will be on Bradford.
And Wembley brings other pressures too. The extra media attention is just one of them.
While sometimes things become a bit of a task and a little bit tedious, you think, well, you could be a lot worse off. You know, there's plenty of other sides that have probably swapped positions with you.
Bradford Bulls are out to do just that. But St Helens say they're fit enough to fight off the challenge. Angela Powers, BBC News, St Helens.
Last year's Challenge Cup final was one of the best in the competition's 100-year history. Bradford's Robbie Paul became the first player to score a hat-trick in a final, took the Man of the Match award and still ended up on the losing side. Paul has again been the centre of attention ahead of Saturday's rematch against St Helens, but their coach believes this year's final will be totally different.
Both squads are, I would say, stronger, and there's a fair bit of different personnel playing in the squads as well. So, even though it makes for good press to say that it's a rematch from last year, I think it's going to be an entirely different game.
That just gives it that bit of extra, you know.
He may never make it onto the fashion catwalk, but Bradford's James Lowes has been a model player in the Bulls Cup run.
He doesn't carry suits off well. He's more used to pit boots, jeans, no t-shirt, you know what I mean?
I think it's a very similar game, very entertaining, very open, and
you know, there'll be a lot of people there and will enjoy it, and you know, hopefully lads will come away with a smile on the face this year.
The Bulls made many friends last season but finished without a trophy. They're desperate to put that right on Saturday.
And that's the sport for now. I'll have more just after 8:30. Andrew.
Look forward to seeing you then. Thanks very much, Eleanor. Let's turn now to the papers, and here to review them is Jessica Davis. Morning, Jessica.
Good morning. Good morning. May the 1st at last, and the pollsters have had their final fling, suggesting a Labour lead of between 13 and 20 points. Whole forests have been destroyed to provide page after page of earnest analysis, but I shall spare you the detail and go straight to The Sun, which, borrowing unashamedly from lottery imagery, tells its readers, today you have a unique opportunity to join the greatest jackpot syndicate ever. Not to be outdone, and frankly pretty miffed with The Sun for pinching its political clothes, the Mirror has even more of Mr. Blair on its front page, which it follows with an orgy of tales of the sick, halt and the lame, who the paper says have suffered under Conservative rule. From the ridiculous to the sublime, The Independent takes a more recherché line, finding its inspiration in the words of Jean-Jacques Rousseau. The English people believe itself to be free. It is gravely mistaken. It is free only during the election of MPs. As soon as the members are elected, the people is enslaved. So today is Freedom Day, the paper concludes, meaning I presume that ordinary people are free at last to go about their business without being mugged by nosy clipboard-bearing pollsters. The Telegraph is more despondent, so depressed indeed that it even asks whether this man might make a decent Prime Minister. Over at the Mail there is a glimmer of optimism because the army of an estimated 4 million don't-know voters could still sink Tony Blair's chances. As the Express declares in what is unquestionably the most carefully neutral front page of the morning, now it's up to you. And so we move on to other battles, the first of which is taking place between animal rights activists and scientists who have bred muscle-bound mice, described by the Mail as Arnold Schwarzenegger lookalikes, although I have to say I can't see the likeness. According to The Guardian, which compares the puny muscles of normal mice with those of the sumo mouse, the genetically enhanced rodent is one step along the way to a cure for muscle diseases. But this won't wash with animal rights people who have condemned the research as cruel. Their anger is nothing compared to that of Mrs. Donna Hill when she discovered her husband Robert had been playing away. In order to pacify his wife, the obliging Mr. Hill agreed to parade through his hometown of Alfreton in Derbyshire, wearing a sandwich board proclaiming his errant ways. Nothing like a spot of old-fashioned shame to clear the air. The couple, I'm happy to report, are now blissfully reconciled.
What a very good idea. I think we'll have to try a bit of that. Now to a man that I'm sure has no need of a sandwich board, and that's our Paul with the business news.
No, indeed. Penny wise, pound foolish could be a good motto for investors. Despite the name, penny shares don't always come with penny profits or losses, and they can be very risky. Earlier this month, a City company called City Equities was fined £250,000 for, amongst other things, failing to explain the risks of investing in them. Now a City regulator is taking a close look at the whole penny share industry. John Moylan reports.
Graham Roberts is the Director of Advertising at a well-known multinational computer services company. For the past decade, he has taken expert advice and invested in stocks to try and safeguard his family's future. He is simply not the sort of person who would be hoodwinked by the promise of a surefire speculative investment. But 2 years ago, that's exactly what happened.
Some 10 years ago, my mother entrusted me with her life savings to invest on behalf of her grandchildren and split it in the year 2000. 2 years ago, a stockbroker advised me to invest in a penny share, a property company he was familiar with. Within weeks, the share price had plummeted, and today, with only 3 years to go to the year 2000, it's only worth 65% of the original figure.
Open up the personal finance section of most national newspapers and you'll find some details about penny shares. This particular advertisement is enticing you to subscribe to the Penny Share Guide. Now, if you send off, what you get for your money is the Investor's Guide to how the stock market really works, a beginner's guide to penny shares, some information on how to buy and sell shares, and of course the all-important monthly newsletter. From here, your first actual trading in penny shares can be just a phone call away. That ease of access and lack of awareness about the risks of investing in penny shares have prompted the Personal Investments Authority to tighten its regulations. Penny share dealers will now be forced to place risk warnings in all newspaper promotions. Before buying shares, dealers will have to ensure investors actually sign a risk warning, and any subsequent deals made over the telephone will have to be taped. Graham's experience with penny shares have taught him some painful lessons.
Dad, is that how you spell etc.?
He now has a balanced portfolio of stocks, and he's prepared for the fact that their value may go down as well as up. The new penny share regulations, which come into force in September, should ensure fewer people make similar mistakes in the future.
Well, never mind about the penny shares. If you want to know what the big shares are doing on the big markets, Adam will be here in half an hour to tell you all about that. Meantime, let me hand you back to Andrew.
And it's 7:45. They normally mark a long, hot and dry summer, but already this spring they've left their scar on moorlands across the country. Brush fires have destroyed hundreds of acres of moors, a situation set to worsen if the drought continues. Such is the concern. Park rangers on the North Yorkshire moors and local fire services are meeting today to discuss how best to deal with the threat. Our reporter Emma Howard is there. Morning, Emma.
Good morning, Andrew. We're in the middle of 554 square miles of national park, and most of that is moorland. And in tinder-dry conditions, the rich peaty soil here makes a perfect fuel for fire. Now, thankfully, this year, the fires have so far been fairly small. But in 1976, this whole area was almost devastated by flames. 21 years ago, fire swept across thousands of acres of heathland on the North York moors. The blaze took hundreds of firefighters many days to bring under control, but it smouldered on for 6 months.
This is Glaisdale Moor, where the fire started some 20 years ago and burnt across here and was coming across here as quick as anybody could walk and burnt past here and then out to the road. As you can see, there has been some regeneration done. We spent some time on the regeneration programme, but there are patches where there has been no regeneration or very little taking place, the odd tuft of heather and grass appearing. Total devastation of parts of the moor, and some of it will never ever recover.
The recent drought has already brought tinder-dry conditions to the moor, and that's meant a number of small brush fires.
If this is dry and we have a fire on the top, this all burns and it is extremely dangerous.
An accident waiting to happen?
Exactly, yes. In 76 this caught fire just above here and burnt for several months. The fire on the top was out, but down here it was still smouldering right through into November. We used a heat-seeking camera and we found hot spots even in November. This should be damp and it is quite dry. We haven't had a lot of rainfall since Christmas, and this could be quite a busy summer for us if it doesn't rain. This is where the Glaisdale fire was stopped 20 years ago. On the moor behind me, the wind caught the fire and was pushing it so fast that the firefighters had to run before the flames to get back here to their transport. And it was so hot, the tar on the road was melting. And they actually dug big furrows here with a plough to stop the fire spreading any further.